raise a couple of points with the motion as drafted, and I want to hear from colleagues. So please add me to the list again, because I'd like to hear the other opinions first. But in terms of immediately in 6 meetings, again, no issue studying this. Whether or not we need 6 meetings, I mean, we're open to the idea, but based on the witnesses listed in this motion, that wouldn't equate to 6 meetings. So I think the Conservatives are perhaps maybe being a little disingenuous in terms of what this motion says and what they hope to accomplish. But we can debate those numbers in terms of what's needed, in terms of immediately. So I guess based on this, the Conservatives are abandoning the auto theft study. They don't want to complete C26, which, as we heard from witnesses, would actually have direct impacts on Canadians' safety, for example, during a weather event where phone lines could go down and there wouldn't be protections in place to ensure that telecommunication companies or banking have robust procedures in place to avoid cyber attacks, or even, like I said, in the example of a weather event, to ensure that there's a robust system in place. I guess Conservatives don't care about those impacts. And again, this committee can determine timing, but this was something that committee had determined in terms of the sequencing of meetings. So if auto theft is being abandoned, cybersecurity is being abandoned, and then the other studies that we were looking at as well, in terms of just timing. And then I would assume that the minister's visit on mandate is also being abandoned, which it was scheduled for next week, given if this motion passes as is. So I have concerns with some of that, just given the other committee priorities that we've talked about. But like I said, I'm prepared to listen to what other opinions in terms of priority and sequencing, but we're not opposed to this study. I would also suggest, Mr. Chair, I'm going to move just one amendment for now, and that is to add the following witnesses: Howard Sapers, the former correctional investigator for Canada, the John Howard Society of Canada, the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies, Aboriginal Legal Services, Black Legal Action Center, and Canadian Civil Liberties Association. And I'll distribute those names to the clerk. I may have other amendments later, Mr. Chair, in terms of, as I said, my raised concerns about, just in terms of sequencing and the amount of meetings. But we're more than happy to move forward to continue the continuation of this study. But I do want to take into account other people's comments before making any additional amendments. But I think it's important we add some additional witnesses there.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connell. Do we have any comments on those amendments, on this amendment? Mr. Lloyd, please.
Yes, I don't have any issue with any of those witnesses, but I just would note that at the beginning of Ms. O'Connell's statement that she was talking about how Conservatives were being disingenuous because this wouldn't take 6 meetings, but I think certainly with those additional witnesses, I think it would take us to 6 meetings. And so I think that just, it shows that, we have no problem with adding those witnesses. And we look forward to having 6 meetings on this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Biddle, you're up, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate being here today and the questions that need to be asked. I agree with Ms. O'Connell that it's important that we continue our study. Even though this is a meeting not normally scheduled, this is, I think, a continuation of what this committee has been studying. And we've heard some, in my mind anyways, excellent recommendations. I know from Mr. Danson, who's the lawyer for the French and Mahaffey families. I guess I'm a bit disappointed that we haven't had the time to sit down and make those recommendations and provide a report. And perhaps this is a good opportunity to continue those discussions. But my worry is, and I agree with Monsieur Paul Hus that people don't understand the system. He's right. My worry is that certain politicians attempt to use situations like this to cloud how the system operates. On this committee right now, there's a former police officer who has a distinguished career of service, a former prosecutor who I also believe had a distinguished career of service to his community. But they know, and kind of not acknowledging the fact that our legal system operates independent of elected officials, that these decisions are made in terms of reclassification of inmates, made independently of elected officials. And as elected officials, we can be angry. I was very public in terms of my extreme disappointment and shock in terms of Mr. Bernardo's transfer. And it's something that we expressed as a committee, but these are decisions outside our control. I know Mr. Mott's probably didn't arrest certain people that other individuals in his community would want arrested. Mr. Caputo may have asked for a sentence that was lower than victims may have wanted, but he was making those decisions, and Mr. Mott's were making those decisions independently. And they were not popular, but they were not subject to, in Mr. Mott's case, the mayor coming in and saying this is wrong, or in Mr. Caputo's case, the premier coming in and saying this is inappropriate. Back when we had Ann Kelly, who's the commissioner in, I asked her, can the minister get involved in this? Can the minister direct the correctional services in the transfer of an inmate? Is it in a legal order? And her quote was, or her response to my question was, my understanding is that the minister does
Mr.
not
Biddle, please, we have a point of
role.
order.
Sorry.
And my apologies, Mr. Chair. My apologies for interrupting Mr. Biddle, but I just wanted to clarify, we are speaking on the amendments as proposed by Ms. O'Connell right now. Is that correct?
No, we're speaking just in the speaking order.
Okay, but don't we have to deal with?
Yes, in the amendment.
Sorry to clarify, we are speaking on the amendments right now. Okay, so I just would just say maybe it is relevant to the greater study, but maybe if we could be talking about these amendments before by Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll finish my point and then I'll give up the floor. That is appropriate. I thought we were back on the general list. I will just add Ms. Kelly's comments and then give up the floor and go back on the speaking list if that's all right. Her response was that the minister does not have a role. It's very much an operational decision. So, Mr. Chair, if I can go back on the list on the main motion, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. Ms. Ferrari, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to everyone for being here. And I know the victims' families are watching at home. Marcia, Laura, and Tennille, and you know, I hope we get some resolve today for you, as I know how re-traumatized you've been. I want to read this into the record because I think it's really important. Everyone here, everyone in this courthouse, everyone in this city, everyone in this province, everyone in this country knows that you are a dangerous offender. The behavioral restraints that you require is jail. You require it, in my view, for the rest of your natural life. You are a sexually sadistic psychopath. The likelihood of you being treated is remote in the extreme. That is Justice Lesage, who sentenced Paul Bernardo. Those are his words. And when I came into this committee today, a reporter stopped me and asked me if we believe that criminals should be focusing on, if we should be in our justice system focusing on rehabilitation rather than punishment. And I asked that reporter to repeat back to me what the sentencing judge said about Bernardo. Can he ever be rehabilitated? And the answer is no. And so what we're here today to do is to discuss what this is, and I want to talk about the amendments that Ms. O'Connell has put forward, and I think adding more witnesses to the list is a great idea, because the point of this motion that was put forward by my colleague, Mr. Caputo, is to figure out how and why this secret transfer happened of Canada's most sadistic and notorious rapists and killers. Because if we don't understand how and why, then we can't fix it. And so I want to read to you, there was an article that came out March 9th by the CBC. Corrections chief briefed Mendocino's chief of staff weeks before Bernardo's prison transfer. In fact, the office was notified 7 times. So to Ms. O'Connell's point about, in years gone by, never have we seen such gross incompetence. This isn't necessarily always about policy and legislation. This is about an incompetent people who didn't do their job. That's what we have to delve into here to make sure that this never happens again.
Rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Chair.
Go ahead, Ms. Michaud.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. Could we refocus the debate, because we have a motion before us that is dealing with Luca Magnotta, and it's not one about Paul Bernardo, and the MP seems to be digressing. So could we please come back to discussing what Ms. McConnell talked about, and then we can go on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Michaud. Ms. Farrell, please, could you?
Thank you, Chair. Actually, the motion put forward does say, in light of the transfer of sadistic killer Luca Magnotta out of maximum security prison to a medium security prison, the same facility that serial killer and rapist Paul Bernardo was transferred to last year. So absolutely, this includes Bernardo, and it's important that we talk about that. So back to my point, I am here, and in regard to the amendments, which I think is critical, and it is great to hear that Mr. Biddle is going to be supportive of this, as this directly impacts the people of his riding who have written directly to him. And I'm going to read into the record some of the comments that have been stated. So this comes from Laura, Marcia, and Tennille, who were the best friends of Kristen French, whose life was taken. And when I asked of their response to the CBC article that the Minister of Public Safety's office was notified 7 times, and their response, and she gave me permission to read this to the committee. Hi, Michelle. Once again, we are saddened and disappointed that the Government of Canada has added to the continued emotional trauma and victimization of the many people who have been affected by this man and his brutal crimes. To know that so much communication took place about the transfer, and yet no one deemed it important enough to ensure that the minister was addressed personally, speaks yet again to the disregard of victims in our criminal justice system. This has to change. Victims should and must come first. Thank you for your continued effort on this. Signed, Laura, Marcia, and Tennille. Now, the bigger question has come up here today of where this all sits in terms of operations. And who does the Commissioner of Corrections Canada report to?
Point of order, please. Go ahead.
I guess what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I think my comments were called on in terms of it being specific to Ms. O'Connell's amendment, and I think Ms. Ferrari, though her points are relevant to the motion at large, if we can focus on Ms. O'Connell's amendment, and then we can get back to the main motion and discuss those points that are relevant.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle.
Thank you. So I guess to come back to the amendment, which is where I am speaking on, is that number 6, and the meetings that Ms. O'Connell has suggested we do less than, and in terms of moving things around, and I think this with adding those.
Point of order.
Mr. McKinnon, go ahead.
The amendment has got nothing to do with number of meetings. It's just the number of witnesses. So I'm wondering if we could perhaps proceed to a vote on that amendment, and then we could go back to the main motion.
You want to vote?